Now, if we look at the modern art movements in Europe in the 19th century, we have three of them: Romanticism, Realism, and Symbolism. Romanticism dates back to the first half of the 19th century. The dates for Romanticism are usually 1800 through 1850. Now let's talk about Romanticism as a movement. And we will compare the principles of Romanticism with the principles of the Enlightenment. And we'll take the same four major ideas: reason, nature, liberty, and progress. And we will see how Romanticism is different from the Enlightenment in discussing those four major principles. So let's begin with reason. As you remember, for the Enlightenment thinkers, human reason is the most important factor in human development. Human reason is autonomous. It is sufficient to discover the wonders of the universe by itself. Human reason does not need the support of anything, including revelation. Now, for Romanticism, this sounds like an overreach, because for Romantics, reason and rationality do represent an important part of human existence. But there is something in human existence or human life that can never be reduced to rationality. And this is, first of all, human emotions, human feelings, human intuition. Emotions are irrational. Our feelings are irrational. We do not control them rationally. Our intuition is irrational and can be stronger than our reasoning. So Romantics prefer feelings and emotions to reason, and that preference is clearly seen in their art. For example, if we look at the paintings, neoclassical paintings that correspond to the Enlightenment are centered around the composition and the structure of the painting, while Romantic paintings focus more on the color rather than the overall composition. The same in music. Let's say classical Viennese school of music, Mozart, Haydn, early Beethoven. If you listen to Mozart, you will see that his music is very, very precisely composed. It focuses on the rules of composition. Structure is brilliant. Now, when you listen to Romantic composers, Chopin, for example, or Schumann, or late Beethoven, you will see that these composers give preference to the quality of the sound over the composition, because sound touches our soul and invokes our emotions, while composition appeals to our sense of rationality. Now, moving on to nature. Remember that for the Enlightenment thinkers, nature was either the universe or human nature. The Enlightenment thinkers saw the universe as being ruled by its own laws, like a gigantic clock. God may have created it, God may have created the laws, but God cannot intervene into this creation because the laws are necessary and sufficient for this creation to be sustained. For Romantics, that was a very cold idea about both God and his creation. Romantics came back to religion, and Romantics identified nature as part of God. According to the German philosopher Schelling, God created the universe out of himself. And therefore, nature, as we know it, is part of God. Nature is divine. Nature to God is like our body is to our soul. So God is the soul of nature that moves it into any direction. So therefore, nature as we know it is not just a neutral force that has to be reckoned with and whose laws have to be discovered. Nature is something more intimate. Nature is something that purifies us, that makes us more spiritual. Hence the famous Romantic idea of going back to nature. A French-Swiss philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in the 18th century already, in one of his books writes that our modern industrial civilization corrupts people, that people are born good by nature, but when they grow up, when they are educated, then they develop vices, not virtues. And the only way to escape the corruptive influence of modern civilization is to go back to nature. Hence, he proposes to quit the life in the city, return to the basic, simple, rustic life in the village, and only this radical measure can purify you if you really want purification and salvation. Now, this famous Romantic idea of going back to nature or coming back to nature, I think is still with us in some form or another. Remember the movie Avatar, which is basically a neo-romantic movie. And this idea of going back to nature initiates many of the romantic other tendencies, for example, and interests. For example, the idea that primitive people are somehow better, more spiritual, deeper than modern people. That is one application of this concept of divine nature. Primitive people are not primitive. They are primal, and they are more innocent, and they are more spiritually developed because they live close to nature and close to their environment, because they live in harmony with their environment. So therefore, we as modern people should learn from those tribes. We should come to them. We should learn from them. We should make art about them. Remember Gauguin going to Tahiti and making paintings of Tahitian women, Tahitian culture. So the impulse behind this is one of the romantic ideas. Here is another one. Now, anything that is closer to nature is by definition more spiritual. Hence, such literary characters as Tarzan. Never thought of Tarzan in terms of romanticism, but he's a typically romantic character. Tarzan was raised by the wolf or by whom? Well, in the jungles. And since he is raised by nature, he is much better as a human being than people whom he encounters in the city. Another character is Mowgli. Mowgli was raised by the wolf. So this juxtaposition between nature and civilization, and favoring nature over civilization, is one of the very characteristic features of Romanticism. Another example, children. For neoclassicists, for Enlightenment people, children are just uneducated adults. And therefore, they are not perfect because perfection comes with education. For Romantics, children are actually better than adults because they are closer to nature. They didn't go through this process of education that will corrupt them. So therefore, children are better than grown-ups. Women are better than men because women are closer to nature. Animals are better than men. So moving on to human nature. Human nature, and also the next one, liberty. For the Enlightenment people, liberty was first of all social liberty. So for the Enlightenment people, liberty was something that is external. For Romantics, liberty or personal freedom is intimately connected with human nature. Romantics were the first ones in European culture and art that discovered subjectivity. Liberty is something that makes every person different from others. So it is subjectivity versus objectivity. Personal freedom versus social freedom. Personal desire versus social requirements. Romantics glorified personal freedom and personal subjectivity. They valued them much more than anything that is rational or reasonable, because your inner subjectivity may be very unreasonable, irrational, emotional, but it is much more important than any rational rules that are established in society. So that is also a very important feature of Romanticism and Romantic art in general. When you read books that are written by Romantics, poetry or prose, you will often see this character, the main Romantic character. He, usually he, is young, extremely talented, even more than talented. He is a genius. He is misunderstood by the common people. He is beyond the crowd. He wants to do something extraordinary, either go and save the people, oppressed people, or create something great, or do something that is beyond the expectations of the common people. But since he is misunderstood, he is oppressed, ridiculed, he often dies because of this. So he is a martyr, not for his faith, but for his talent. This is a typical Romantic hero that moves from the pages of one book to another book. Let me add to this a couple of other details. The idea of truth and the idea of a genius. For the Enlightenment thinkers, truth was quite simple. Truth is given to us by science and by reason. Truth is objective and universal. When discovered, it is accepted by everyone. For Romantics, truth is when you partake of as much of creation as possible. Creation is unlimited. Our universe is unlimited. And we have the capacity to partake of a small part, small measure of what we experience. But Romantic geniuses are people who have this extraordinary ability or some kind of special and deeper intuition to understand and to partake of much more of creation than others. As a therefore, they have a special insight into the world. And as a result, they can do something extraordinary. So the Romantic idea of truth is very different from the classical, neoclassical idea of truth. And as a result of this new idea of truth, we have a new concept of genius. The concept of genius is slowly developing in the 18th century. And it begins by a very common understanding that art is like a craft, and if you know the rules of your craft, you will produce your works of art like a baker who produces bread, like a shoemaker who produces shoes. The artist will produce his or her art, and there is nothing special to it. Then, this idea that art is like craft is complemented by the idea that some people are more talented than others, and therefore, in addition to their craft, they possess some kind of intuition or special ability that allows them to make a better art or to make it faster and higher quality. But this ability, this talent, is in principle is not different from craft. It's just the talent of making this. And finally, the next step in the development of this idea was the idea of genius. Romantics thought of a genius not being a super talented person who would just know his craft but has something more. No, they thought that genius is a person who does not have to learn their craft. In fact, It is not by following rules that you become a genius. You become a genius only by breaking the rules. So a genius is a person who breaks traditional rules, goes against the craft masters, and creates something that is completely different because he has special insight. So finally, progress. For the Enlightenment thinkers, if we focus on our rational capacities, if we assume that human nature is good and therefore we have to change the educational system, if we reorganize our society on a more rational foundation, then the progress will be infinite and everyone will live happily ever after. For Romantics, we live not in the times of progress. Humans are degenerating. Modern society is actually degrading humans. It makes humans act not like humans should act. Modern society corrupts us, and in order to purify our souls, we have to come back to the natural state of life, to the natural state of mind, to nature in general. So Romantics just reverse this paradigm, and they think that real progress was way behind us, and what is ahead of us is something that is contrary to progress, regress, degeneration. So overall, to sum up, at the center of the Romantic critique of the Enlightenment stands this critique of human reason and human rationality. We should not take human rationality as the most important source of human knowledge, as the most important part of human life. Human rationality is there, but when we overreach, when we over-focus on human rationality, we lose something that is much more important, much more dear to our heart, which is spirituality. So Romantics take religion and bring it back to the table. Remember that the Enlightenment thinkers in many instances criticized religion, and most of their concepts, progress, liberty, reason, nature, went against traditional Christian worldview. So Romantics bring it back, reintroduce religion, not only into culture, but also into their art. They glorify the national past. They collect medieval folk tales. They also embrace the supernatural. Enlightenment thinkers wanted to be as rational as possible, and therefore they rejected anything that goes beyond reason, anything that is supernatural. Romantics are reintroducing the supernatural dimension into their art. And here we come to one interesting feature of Romantic art. Romantic art is often escapist. Since Romantic artists lived in the historical period of reaction, it was a tough time. They wanted to escape into their own art, and they would create books and poems and ballets about something that is spiritual, great, and very, very far from reality, from real life.